Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. Man, that feels good to say again. Now, this is gonna be something that's a little bit different. If you're new to this channel and you've gone here and you're seeing what's all these music reviews that this guy otherwise does, that's typically because I don't normally talk about movies in the same way. Until now. Mostly because I actually want to talk about this film because I actually have something to say about it, and also because I've been looking to diversify my content a little bit more. But let's be honest, it's for me to get my old catchphrase fast. It works a lot better rolling off the tongue, just sounds better. As such, we're going to be talking about the newest movie, the big one that's crushing at the box office this weekend, Deadpool. Now first, a little bit of disclaimer here. The reason I haven't talked about movies in the past is that I tend to want to be able to see something more than once, go through something more than once in order to provide an effective artistic valuation of it. So thus, take everything I say with a certain grain of salt when it comes to thematic interpretation, because I haven't had the chance to document more outside of some notes that I've taken, and really because I haven't seen it multiple times. There might be things in the set dressing that I might have otherwise missed, although I like to think I'm fairly observant on these sort of things. And I don't typically do movie reviews because, well, you want to be able to see it multiple times in theater. That's a very different time investment than listening to an album over and over and over again. But this time I think I've got enough to say, and that's the reason why I'm going to be talking about this. Don't expect movie reviews to become a frequent part of this channel. I think you can expect them the same sort of frequency with special comments, haphazard when I've got something to say about something. But I actually do want to say something here, and keep in mind, it's off the cuff, it's unscripted, there might be spoilers as a result of that, and also that's going to be a little rough around the edges, so just bear with me here. Editing will try to salvage some pieces that don't count on that much. So yeah. Comic book movies and Deadpool in specific. I like comics. I don't really collect comics. It's just not really my thing. I already have enough monetarily expensive hobbies as it is. And as such, comics, while I'm very familiar with the lore, I wouldn't consider myself a complete fanboy. I'm bound to mess up little details here and there. With a lot of the movies, though, I tend to respond pretty well to them. I don't really care about a lot of the superhero TV shows in the same regards. I've wanted to check out the DC side and the Marvel side. I just haven't had time for it yet. I'm busy with other stuff. But for movies, I think both Marvel and DC have had a reasonably good run of it. They both have their duds on some sides. I think DC's had a lot more of them and a lot more high-profile duds, but Marvel's got their fair share of them. And one of the set of duds where I think Marvel struck out the most has been with the X-Men series. Now, I'll admit I am an X-Men fan, but it's been kind of hard to be an X-Men fan because a lot of the X-Men movies have not really been all that good because X-Men 1 and 2 don't really hold up all that well. X-Men 3 is crap. X-Men Wolverine Origins was just painful. And moving beyond that, my favorite X-Men movie is First Class, mostly because it actually managed to connect. It actually did something interesting. It actually has some good writing, it's some great set design and great costume design, and it actually did something with its budget and its writing there. But moving beyond that, as such, I was going into Deadpool expecting a mid-tier X-Men style of movie, which makes sense because there's X-Men in Deadpool. And I like to say we got that. But at the same time, this is one of those movies where I feel like a lot of X-Men movies, it's good. I did enjoy Deadpool, but I keep on thinking that it could have been a lot better. And it's not just because of the story that it's telling, although I think that's a factor. I think there's a couple distinctive reasons why Deadpool is a good movie and it's a recommended movie, but I don't think we'll ever stand the upper echelon of superhero movies with me, which like the second Captain America movie, The Winter Soldier, or The Avengers, or Watchmen, or The Dark Knight, or Spider-Man 2. Like, there's some great superhero movies. I don't think Deadpool is quite in that level yet. So to explain why that is, let's talk about what actually works in Deadpool, because I think a lot of this movie actually is really, really damn good, really damn funny. For those of you who aren't familiar with the character, he was created in the mid-90s by Rob Liefeld, a guy who has got a lot of infamy in the comic book industry for kind of good reason. He was not especially a really good artist, and he created a lot of very similar characters, and Deadpool is just another one of those, the Punisher, Deathstroke style of characters, where he was the merc with the mouth. He was a discharged special forces guy, disarmed but discharged, of course. He had a healing factor, he carried samurai swords and guns. He was kind of generic in the initial version. But then when I think it was Joe Kelly did the major revisions with his character, it actually turned him into more of a spoof character, more of a live-action cartoon that was riffing on the Marvel Universe as a whole, frequently by breaking the fourth wall. Now that's a very delicate balance of a character to make, and it's why Deadpool has been a critical favorite among certain groups, but can also be best seen as a side character. He's not really something that I would ever see fronting his own book. Now, he has been fronting his own book for a while now, because it's actually fairly well written, it's an interesting character, but he's also not he's like to see him bouncing around the edges. He's comic relief life in that regard. And thus to see him fronting his own movie is kind of strange too. You have to see from an executive side in the movie industry, basically saying this Deadpool character, not only is he weird and strange and profane, so it's gonna be an R-rated movie and thus we're not gonna make nearly as much money, but he's also the kind of character who's kind of hard to get his head around. His brand of humor is very quirky, it's very insider focused. It caters to the comic book nerds, but will it have mainstream wide audience appeal? Which is a very difficult question. It's the reason why initially the promotion for this movie was god-awful. And eventually they said, screw it, they threw money behind it, and turns out people have embraced this movie with open arms. It is now the highest ever R-rated film in terms of box office gross. So let's actually talk about Deadpool himself. Ryan Reynolds is inspired to play Wade Wilson / Deadpool. And I really think Ryan Reynolds owns this part. He's got phenomenal chemistry with the entire cast. He's loving the role. He's got that inspired blend of having that, like, better than expected good looks, being able to play in this sort of film, thus makes the contrast all the harsher when during a superhero transformation, he is made ugly as hell. And a lot of the makeup effects are quite good there, even if the actual transformation sequence is a bit of some body horror stuff you would not otherwise expect to see in a mainstream superhero movie. As such, when you're going through this film and you're watching Ryan Reynolds, he provides a lot of the best energy and power to this film, which you kind of need, giving a lot of the atmosphere and set dressing. We'll get back to that. And he's really good in it. Honestly, Ryan Reynolds makes this movie. It's gonna be the reason why a lot of people will come see this movie. It's also the reason why I think this movie could have been better. And a lot of this comes in a few different, and one main issue I have with this film, in that I'm not sure this film knows exactly what it wants to be. Or in that it knows everything it could be, and instead of just choosing one of those directions, it goes down all three and then tries to laugh at itself for the fun party that it tries to have along the way. And I'm not sure it quite connects as well as it wants to there. At least in terms of having the same emotional pathos that you would get from other big superhero movies, or even other big comedies. And now I say this mostly because the movie spends a hearty amount of time taking the piss out of itself, but also because, and this is the funny thing, it has sort of the pain and gain problem where the acting is so good between the leads, it kind of distances you from the fact that this is intended as a comedy, and you're not always supposed to like this guy. Because keep in mind, Wade Wilson is kind of not of a good person. It's emphasized throughout the story how he doesn't want to be seen as a hero, kind of because he's a bit of a dick when you look at this with outside of context. If he wasn't as charming and likable as Ryan Reynolds is, this would kind of be a bit of a dickish turn. You need the right actor for this. And when paired with the actress opposite him playing Vanessa, his girlfriend, Miranda Bakarim, who does better here than she's done anywhere else, they have such fantastic chemistry that it lends a lot of heart to this film that frankly I don't think anybody would have expected. I mean, this is Deadpool. Having heart, having actual real sincerity, that's what you're supposed to be taking the piss out of. Now, part of this leads to an unexpected problem, and that their chemistry is so good and you get enough to actually buy into the relationship that you kind of wish they actually focused on a little bit more. I'll admit it, I probably had more fun and enjoyed some of the banter between these two in more of the romantic comedy, romantic drama role that they had. There was enough real pathos there that I actually might have enjoyed some of it more than I actually enjoyed some of the parts when we had the merc with the mouth wearing the mask and all the whole costume there. And simply because there was so much dramatic pathos and they had such great chemistry in that regard. It was really charming. I really enjoyed it there. Of course, you need that to make the transition look all the more horrendous, to make it show how much Deadpool has lost. And yet, this movie's never quite taking itself serious enough to delve into that. Never really show what would make him throw up all those barriers and make him kind of act as half insane as he is throughout most of this movie. It also probably wouldn't be as funny in that regard. It's trying to have its cake and eat it in a couple different senses. And at some case, you kind of wish this movie would actually want to choose a specific tone, even though the movie seems to have complete disdain for choosing anything in that regard. So going into this, as I've already talked about that central relationship, but it's also one of the key things that's kind of funny about that movie, because when you take a look at characters who have the most actual dialogue and presence and the ones you want to touch with the most, it's these two. I mean, TJ Miller does a fine enough job as the bartender Weasel. He's got some personality to him, and he plays off of Wade Wilson pretty well. And yeah, I did like that the Colossus shows up, and Brianna Hildebrand as Negasonic Teenage Warhead, which is an X-Men that I guarantee will be getting a lot more attention now that she showed up in this movie. While these are good characters, they're a little bit two-dimensional especially when you compare to Deadpool and his girlfriend. There's more dimension to them, and there's more chemistry there. And while Wade Wilson, Ryan Reynolds has chemistry with everybody, you get the feeling with a little bit of a sharper draft, these characters might have been given a little bit more life beyond the life that the world itself gives to them. And nowhere is this more apparent than with our villain. Oh, jeez. Ed Skrein playing Francis, aka Ajax. He's appropriately menacing. He's got some good chemistry to him. He plays off the other actors reasonably well, but at the same time, he's also the sort of character that kind of frustrates me because in a better written movie, he would be more compelling. In a movie that actually took a little bit more time and was taking itself a little bit more seriously, even if it went for more of a jokey tone, he would have more meat to his character. He would play off Deadpool a little bit better instead of just wanting the guy to shut up. And in some cases, I can kind of sympathize because some of Deadpool's routine can get a little bit stale, if only because of overexposure, because you see a lot of the stuff where he's actually in the costume. A lot of that's already been spoiled in the trailers, which is kind of a bit of a disappointment. You were kind of hoping that there was going to be more gags coming up there. Probably why I enjoyed the stuff when he was out of costume more. A lot of it was more fresh and unique. But as going back to the villain, he's not that he's bad, but he's not particularly interesting in terms of his power set, in terms of the way he behaves and acts. He's basically generic bad guy. And yeah, the movie makes fun of it being generic bad guy, but a sharper movie could have actually had a real compelling villain and still made it funny, and still have Deadpool riffing on the whole thing. There's more cliches and superhero origins that Deadpool could have riffed on there. And that's the other thing. For as much as this is an origin story, it's kind of bizarrely structured. Start off with basically a lot of the central fight scene that you've seen in the trailers, and then it flashes back to show Deadpool's arc of origin to get into where he is right now. And I'll give them a lot of credit in terms of capturing some of the nuances of the origin, how actually kind of gritty and graphic that it is. This movie could easily have gone for a much harder R than it has, and we'll come back to that. But at the same time, in terms of that particular structure, it also means that we're distancing we're building a distinctive wall in distance between the Deadpool, who is the laughing, manic cartoon character, and Wade Wilson himself, is a little bit more dressed down, a little bit subtler, a little bit more compelling, in my opinion at least. And as such, that distance makes the film feel oddly structured. It feels a little bit lumpy and misshapen at points. A couple spots drag a little bit more than it really should. There is a couple spots that, especially during that transformation stuff, that feel a little bit too leaden. I know they had to emphasize how horrific this transformation was, but at the same time, I feel they could have been a little bit more economical with their time in terms of, if you want to stretch it out, you want to go for more of that horror element, you could have pushed it harder here. That's the other issue that I have with this film. For as much as it is an R, because there's cursing and then there's tits hanging out, and if you will see Ryan Reynolds' penis if you're into that sort of thing, it's never really quite transgressive enough, in my opinion. Honestly, a lot of the kills, for the ones we've seen in the trailers, they are good, they are creative, but they're nothing that truly blew my mind in the same way that, hell, the one most memorable kill that I'm from, let's say, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, they basically throw somebody into a jet turbine. That's a pretty violent kill, and while there's a couple kills in this movie that are just as graphic, that are just as bloody, but honestly, I feel this movie could have pushed harder in that hard R territory to really shock and scandalize. And keep in mind that a lot of the set dressing in this movie is playing up that grittier, realistic side of it. A lot of desaturated tones in the shot composition. A lot of this movie is dirty as hell. A lot of the sets are very grimy and dark and it has that texture and age to it that I really like. It's definitely a grubbier movie, and yet at the same time, it never quite goes all the way into exploitation. And I kind of wish it did. It could have gone over the top with exploitation, plays it with a little bit more dark comedy, and hell, you could even throw in just a superb lead performance, and it would have still worked, especially considering the more human side of Wade Wilson does have some of those moments which are, I don't know, they could work in that sort of inspired exploitation vein, especially considering bizarrely, it's kind of progressive considering some of the sexual content that's on display. It's not really objectifying in ways that you would otherwise expect outside of, well, maybe Ryan Reynolds himself. So, now there's a couple of other little elements I'd like to highlight here. The first being Negasonic Teenage Warhead. I really like her character in terms of the way she's presented, and I kind of think it's a little bit inspired the way her character is presented, because basically she doesn't buy into Deadpool's half-ass shtick half the time. She basically like, yeah, I'm too cool for this. And to some extent, she kind of is. I kind of like that the movie's willing to take the piss out of its main character, considering how much the main character is taking the piss out of everybody. With some truly inspired jokes and some very, very subtle jokes that I kind of wish I'd gotten more of a response. But at the same time, it's kind of a risky proposition when you do that because, well, you can only take so much piss and break so many fourth walls before you start to feel like, well, there's not a lot to this story. And you start losing some of that pathos which the good acting provides. And it doesn't help in matters that the more I'm thinking about it, while I like the smaller stakes of it all, it also defiantly knows that it's a smaller stakes movie, and you kind of wish that with the acting that it had played to those smaller stakes a little bit better. As it is, it goes for your big finale with your shootout with soldiers and your big battle on the top of what looks like a crashed aircraft carrier of some kind. I don't know, maybe one of those crashed helicarriers from one of the other superhero movies in the Marvel universe. I have no idea. But at the same time, you kind of look at this and I'm like, you know what? This is cool. You're taking the piss out of that obvious ending superhero fight where they're trying to save money, or was it done because you were trying to save money on this film? There's always the difference between what is a superhero cliche that's embraced straight and what's a superhero cliche that you're making fun of. Because this movie kind of does both, and I'm not sure it does it entirely that well. And this ties into the character of Colossus, who is one of the X-Men who shows up in this movie. I actually quite like his performance. He's very dry, he's very stone-witted, but he's also got that sort of breed of humor where I'm amazed how much humor they get out of Colossus by being the straight man and being more of that kind of gruff, generally approachable character that is wanting Deadpool to be the hero. The funny thing is that in this movie, Deadpool is a hero. In his own way. He's an anti-hero. He will kill people. He will beat the crap out of people. He is very bloody and violent. One could argue he's more pragmatic, whereas Colossus will let somebody live, and he's got more of a sense of decorum. I like taking the piss out of Colossus, but at the same time, when you're coming to the modern age of superhero storytelling, the framing can get a little bit weird. Because on the one hand, there's going to be people who say, well, Deadpool does the right things and what he's doing, and that Colossus is just a lunk over there who actually is just trying to cut in on Deadpool's fun. And yet at the same time, Colossus actually does kind of have a point. Once again, it's trying to have its cake and eat it too. It's trying to go in a number of different directions. It can actually have that more of that romantic comedy, romantic drama side of things. Probably the best acted part of the movie, if I'm being completely honest. Then you want to have the hard R exploitation side of it, which I actually liked, but they could have gone farther with it. And then you have the superhero origin story going up the middle, and it feels the most bare bones there. And in terms of, yeah, it's a smaller stakes story, I can appreciate that, but you're trying to do three disparate things at once. I don't think this movie goes over the top enough in order to mesh them all together. You use that superhero situation as your foundational story, but even still, with Deadpool intercutting it and breaking it and fourth wall separating it out, the way it's structured, it never really has that, it feels a little bit shaky in the foundation there. Whereas I think the best part, the thing they can control the most, is that central chemistry, but at the same time, I don't think they give it enough chance to really breathe and really go into some nuance and depth of the characters. Nuance in which they definitely have, if you pay attention to the dialogue and pay attention to the little details, especially in solid performances where, yeah, Ryan Reynolds is kind of disparaging about going back to this girl thinking that all he will be valued for is his looks and his charisma that comes through in that side of things. That's an interesting concept that I think that this movie could do more to emphasize, and well, it doesn't really go much more into the man behind the merc with the mouth. And I kind of wish it had, because there's a lot of material to get to there, into that character himself. He's a fascinating guy. And yet, at the other hand, I can see why some people would say that, yeah, you could have that interesting character drama, but then you throw it in with ultra violence, it's not going to work. It's going to be too totally incoherent. But here's why I don't think that's entirely true. Because Tarantino's been doing this for years. And there's a lot of other exploitation film directors who've been doing this for years, who will go for those broad points and will take it with a little bit more of a comedic touch to it. Sure, they'll go for that side of things. And they're able to marry the tones well enough to make it work. And I think this might be an issue with the director. I believe his name is Tim Miller. Now, Tim Miller, you can tell some of his sensibilities come in from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, where he worked as a creative supervisor. And this is his first major-length directorial debut. You can kind of tell, but at the same time, he's got the right sensibility for marrying comedy and drama, and that you actually got and you saw from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. And yet, at the same time, just like in that movie, sometimes the sensibilities don't always intersect as well. It's a very, very difficult tonal match, and I don't think this movie got it as well as, let's say, Scott Pilgrim did. So, ultimately, where I'm coming down on this movie, I do like it a lot. I don't think it's a great movie. I don't think it will hold up and stand the test of time entirely that well. Some of the jokes are a little dated, but they're dated in a way that doesn't make them feel immediately dated. And there's also some fantastic soundtrack choices that I think really help this matters. The usage of Chicago and Wham and DMX on the tracks are just absolutely excellent. I really love how the music was played throughout this course of this movie. But at the same time, it's also going to be one of those films that they're now talking about making a Deadpool franchise. And they're talking about bringing in Cable, and with Cable will probably come Bishop. And on the one hand, I'm divided on this, because Cable is not really interesting as a character, and giving him a higher budget will not make him that much more interesting of a character. But at the same time, he's a good dramatic foil for what Deadpool is. Putting him into one of these movies would probably work better, arguably, than putting in Colossus probably would. I'd like to see Deadpool become a little bit more of a side character, or focus more on the man there. You don't need him running his own film, at least for me, in my point of view. So where I think this movie could have been improved is fleshing out the villain, maybe a little bit sharper when it focuses on other characters that are not Ryan Reynolds. I think some of the action choreography is excellent, superb work there, but I do think it could have afforded to be a little bit more graphic when it really wanted to be. But these are frankly minor nitpicks. For the teenage kids who will go in to see Deadpool for the first time, it'll be their first R-rated superhero movie, it will blow their freaking minds. For me, yeah, Watchmen's still better in terms of some of the creative violence, which I think, honestly, Watchmen handled a fair bit better than this movie did. But the sense of humor is there. I think a lot of it might not hold up as much upon repeated viewings in the same way that some comedies do. But I think Deadpool is worth seeing. And take that what it's worth. Now, keep in mind, I don't think a Deadpool franchise is precisely a best idea, but considering how this movie is set to make a crap ton of money this weekend, easily recoup its budget, and reestablish Ryan Reynolds as a career star, like, I'm happy for that. It's gonna give him his career back. But beyond that, I don't know. I'm happy that I saw this movie, but it's not one I don't think I'm gonna be rushing out to see again. Again, good, not great. Let's call it a 7 out of 10 and do this in my typical style of reviews. But if there's anything else you want me to see or hear, I can't guarantee I'm going to be seeing much more movies. As I said, it's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. I'm kind of curious how people are going to respond to this review, given that it's all unscripted, it's all off the cuff, and I'm guessing it's fairly rambly, although not as rambly as other critics I know, but who knows. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.